Good evening and welcome to The Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy, broadcasting to you from the FEMA Region 5, deep in the bowels of the United Police State of Amnesia. Today is July 18th, 2014, and the news that people around the world are very disturbed about is the Malaysian airplane, the passenger jetliner that was apparently shot down over the rebel-held areas of Ukraine, where, of course, you have a fairly recent flare-up between those parts of the population that want to join the European Union and those parts of population in the easternmost part of Ukraine that want to rejoin with Russia. Remember, Ukraine, until fairly recently, was part of the Soviet Union, part of Russia. It was only Nikita Khrushchev, when he was back in the 60s, and he's sort of in a kind of a goofy goodwill gesture, kind of gave Ukraine its independence, but a lot of the Russian-speaking people in the eastern part of that country really want to rejoin with what they consider to be their real country, Russia. And of course, Russia has a long tradition going back hundreds of years and a long history in which Kiev and the Ukraine are a very important part of that history. So yeah, they do have a claim on at least the eastern part of Ukraine, if not all of Ukraine. Now the problem is, of course, that there are some very powerful factions in the government of Ukraine that feel like they'll maybe get a better deal if they go with the EU. And why they think that, I find it amazing, because other of the outlying countries in sort of around the edges of the EU, they have not done so well. They're in terrible shape as a result of the austerity measures, the loans by the IMF and the World Bank that they have been forced down their throat, that are supposed to help them, and in reality that money is sucked up by the wealthiest members of that society. The countries themselves don't see a lot of benefit, and then the people are supposed to pay off the loans with interest, and it becomes a nightmare for those people in which your country is laid open, prostrate on the ground, you're opened up, you're dissected by the globalist bankers and the globalist corporations, and they are taking out your organs. In other words, your precious your minerals, your resources, your natural resources, the real wealth. And I've of course said this many times. The real wealth in the world is the real tangible wealth is the natural resources, and the money is only a symbol. It's a symbolic wealth. It's not real wealth. It's not an actual asset. It can vanish. Money, the value of money, can literally vanish overnight, and it has many times. Lots of recorded instances. Now, people consider money as a stable chip, kind of a bargaining chip to be used to buy and sell, but it is only symbolic, as we know. Okay, and the old saying, not worth the paper it's printed on, that is actually in reality true. It's the value of the dollar or any other currency has only, unless it's backed by a tangible asset like gold or silver or some other natural resource, because gold and silver are both mined out of the earth, and it's a natural resource which has held its value, is considered to have intrinsic value because of its beauty, because of its utilitarian, the usefulness of gold. Gold and silver have both been used in making jewelry, making in industrial uses. Diamonds is another sort of a very useful. It's a crystal. It has industrial uses. We were just using a diamond tip saw just the other day to cut ceramic tile because diamond is so hard. So it has a natural intrinsic value. And so we're looking at potentially a scenario in which the two giant behemoths, you have the West and the East, are confronting each other over this territorial issue of Ukraine. And it's more than about just the national sovereignty of Ukraine. It's actually much greater. It's the neocon plan, agenda for the 21st century to maintain and increase full spectrum global dominance over the world. And that means over resurgent empires like Russia, the former Soviet Union, very proud of its old empire, much of which was broken up in the early 90s with the collapse of communism in Russia. But they have a very proud tradition. They're a huge country, enormous, way bigger than the United States, and they feel that they have the right and the punching power to stay as one of the top dogs, the major players on the world stage. And of course, almost literally, that's what it is. It is a stage. It's a play. It's a game which goes on. But unfortunately, people die in this game. A lot of people are made to suffer as a result of the ongoing political posturing and the brinkmanship. That's what's happening between the West and the East right now, is you have the leaders increasing their threat level. Obama just announcing sanctions against Russia. I mean, the country is so gigantic. Why would sanctions have much of an effect? They have their own resources that they can tap into. They're not a country that needs to rely on food or any other source of sustenance from the rest of the world. Oil, they have their own oil, this type of thing. So this is probably more symbolic as far as I can tell. And they did, of course, Obama did say that we're also freezing the assets of certain very wealthy, powerful men who are Russian. They've done this before in other countries. How they could get away with this is beyond me. That they really feel that they can manipulate and control events. Now the reality, I mean, look, none of this would have happened if the NATO countries, the United States included, had not gone with this long-term plan to encircle Russia. And in order to encircle Russia, you need the Ukraine. And containment. It's the policy of containment, where you keep Russia off balance. You keep threatening it. You keep putting the pressure on. You don't let Russia increase its sphere of influence. Instead, you increase your sphere of influence into the very borders and keep pressing, keep pushing against Russia to try to eventually weaken it. Or keep it weakened, keep it off balance, keep it unstable. And you can threaten them. You could put in the intercontinental ballistic missiles, maybe in Ukraine, threaten, it's all just a big game. Same thing happens with China and the East and the United States pressing in China. Wherever you have a country that looks as if it might threaten the hegemony of the giant Western powers, then they're going to do whatever they can to try to cut back on this, to cut them down, to tamp them down. It's whack-a-mole. It's the whack-a-mole game. Every time they stick their head up, you whack them down, but then some other mole comes popping out, another country somewhere else, and they have to whack them down, and that makes another. So they're using, it's a never-ending circle. It's a never-ending cycle of which basically sucks the wealth out of the world, takes it out of the hands of the ordinary people, keeps most of the people of the world incredibly impoverished and in fear, while a very small group reaps the benefits, the financial rewards. And there's a horrible price to pay for joining this empire, for being a part of this empire, for doing the will of this evil empire. I wanted to show you a short clip, and I think it's fairly self-explanatory. I'll show it to you. Let's put it on the screen. Here it's only a little over 2 minutes. Okay, so this is a local news clip about a young Army Ranger who killed himself. Let's watch it, and then I'll talk about it.
A soldier's widow says his fellow Rangers would not do anything to help him before he took his own life.
The Army found Staff Sergeant Jared Hageman's body at a training area of Joint Base Lewis McChord a few weeks ago. KOMO 4's Keith Eldridge has this exclusive report live from the base. Keith?
Yeah, a spokesman for the base told me today that the nature of the death is still undetermined, but the widow of Staff Sergeant Hageman tells me that he took his own life and it didn't need to happen.
It was just horrible. And he would just cry.
Ashley Hageman says her husband Jared tried to come to grips with what he'd seen and done on 8 deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, and told her
that there's no way that any God would forgive him, that he was going to hell. He couldn't live with that anymore.
Ashley says her Army Ranger husband wanted out of the military.
He just wanted to know what it felt like to be normal again.
He had orders to return to Afghanistan this month. Instead, on June 28th, Ashley says her husband took a gun and shot himself in the head on base. She claims the Rangers never took his pleas for help seriously.
There's no way that they should have not been able to pick up on it. When he's telling them, he's reaching out.
And today, she found out she's not alone in wanting to speak out.
Hi. I'm so sorry. Thank you for coming.
Mary Corkhill Kirkland lost her son Derek to suicide more than a year ago. She says doctors at Madigan Hospital considered him a low risk for suicide despite 3 earlier attempts. They sent him back to his unit where he hanged himself.
Do you think the Army basically killed your son?
Yes. My son did not want to die. He wanted help. He was crying out for help.
Remember that. You're in good hands. You're not alone here.
So nice to finally meet somebody else who understands.
I know.
Thank you so much.
Now, we contacted the 75th Ranger Regiment, but no comment from them as yet. As for the 2 women, they're joining forces tonight to speak out just across the base from here with other fellow veterans and other fellow active duty soldiers speaking out about Sergeant Kirkland's death and also the upswing in recent suicides. Reporting live at Joint Base Lewis McChord, Keith Eldridge, KOMO 4 News.
Okay, that is a local broadcast. It's not something that maybe you would have seen. A lot of these things don't get the national attention that they should get, but in reality, these suicides are ongoing. That particular one is from 2011, but they're definitely ongoing. This young man was about to be deployed for the 9th tour. Apparently, they have no choice. They can't just walk away in the modern Army. He was an Army Ranger. These are an elite group. They're supposed to be highly trained professionals. But what did his wife say? That he told her that God would never forgive him, that he believed he was going to hell for what he had seen and done in Iraq and Afghanistan. So you have to wonder, what did he do? And this is the reality, of course, of this what they're calling war, but in reality it is more of a genocide. It's more of what I would call an imperialistic adventure for profit. It has nothing to do with protecting America from the evil invaders or the bad guys. You know, the level that the military operates on, I think, it reminds me of playing Army when you were a kid, maybe 8, 10 years old, and oh, I want to be the good guys. Oh, I'll be the bad guys. Well, they literally still use those terms, good guy, bad guy, and these are supposed to be adults. And of course, it's not true. It's a lie. And clearly, this young man, he was a husband, he was a father, he has, his attractive young wife, he has a young baby that he would like to return to his life. He would like to have a life, but he didn't know that when he participated in those crimes, which he thinks he will go to hell for, he didn't know when he killed that civilian or whatever it was that he did, or he threw that hand grenade into that house and those women and children were inside, or when he participated in the indiscriminate slaughter of civilians, whatever he participated in, he didn't know that that he did those crimes, that he was killing himself already. He was already a casualty. He was already gone from this world, out of this world. He was alive, but he wasn't really alive. And all he did when he killed himself was acknowledge that he was already dead. His life was ruined. You can't go back, my friends, after doing that. After participating in these kind of crimes, how can you go back? You can pretend that it's a joke or that you're really doing something, but when you realize that you are not having any effect to protect America, to protect anybody, and then all you're doing is just indiscriminately going around, kicking in doors, terrorizing people, killing people, blowing things up. That's what the military does very well, and mostly defenseless. And a lot of these, these horrible Muslims, and what are they doing? They want you out of there. They consider you to be an invader, a demonic invader, like if the Nazis were to come into a town and start indiscriminately dragging people out into the street and shooting them, or torturing them, or imprisoning them, then the population would probably sooner or later begin to resist. And some of this is really about that. That's really what this is about. We like to think of the term Taliban as a monolithic term. Taliban actually means Quranic student, means the word student, and the Taliban is not the monolithic group of evil terrorists that the U.S. media would like to paint them as. The evildoers, as George W. Bush so cogently stated it. He was just reading from a script which was given to him. We'll go with the word evildoers. And really, those people have their own sets of problems. They had problems before the United States and NATO invaded Iraq and Afghanistan. They had problems with their leadership. They had problems with corruption. They had problems with the oppression of women, children, the oppression of various groups by other groups in Afghanistan and Iraq. Afghanistan has been corrupt for a very long time, from way before the Americans got involved in 2001. And they're still corrupt. And the Afghan government is one of the most corrupt in the world. And when a soldier, an idealistic, young, naive, and I have to say naive and ignorant, basically ignorant soldier, joins up with the U.S. military thinking that he's going to protect democracy or freedom or the United States or whatever he thinks he's doing, he's in for a rude shock. I mean, who did we put in Afghanistan? Karzai. Who did we put in Iraq? Maliki. Both come from very corrupt backgrounds, and they're not playing the game the way their American handlers are very happy about, and they're oppressing certain groups. and they're lining the pockets of their own relatives. Their relatives are doing quite well, very well, because, well, the president is my uncle, or, I'm the nephew of the, or my son or my grandson or whatever. The extended family, their friends, their class, all these people are going to benefit from having their guy in a position of power, and that's just the way it is. And I mean, at least the Taliban in 2000 decided they were going to crack down on the poppy fields. In fact, as you probably know, Afghanistan is one of the world's most prolific growers of the poppy, which is made into heroin and opium. But the Taliban decided they were going to crack down on it. They believed it was anti-Islamic in 2000. And you have to scratch your head and wonder, is part of the reason why the U.S. invaded Afghanistan in 2001 that their supply, perhaps the government's supply of cheap heroin and opium, was cut off by the Taliban because they shut down the farmers? And that's one thing we've seen since right immediately back in 2001, right after the invasion. The production of poppies skyrocketed, it doubled, it tripled, and it's one of the back up there with the major supplier to the world of the opium that creates heroin. And right now, what do we have in the United States? We have an absolute avalanche, a flood of extremely cheap opium. And a lot of that opium comes from Afghanistan, of heroin, black tar heroin they're calling it, or opium. I don't know much about these drugs, but apparently it's much cheaper than it used to be, and it's the drug of choice for many, many, many people in the United States. And U.S. troops, combat troops, actually have been deployed. What they do is they protect those fields. And I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't give those farmers, the U.S. military didn't give those farmers fertilizer, seeds maybe, help, financial aid, whatever they need to keep the flow of drugs high. Because how do you suppose the CIA and all these other secret, the CIA is not so secret, but there are many other secret intelligence gathering, and they call it intelligence gathering, but they're really like fifth column spies running around destabilizing things and causing trouble around the world. How do you suppose they fund their operations? Part of it is this lucrative worldwide drug trade. Now, it's also true, of course, that the sex trafficking and the trafficking in human beings is becoming even more lucrative than the drug trade. And they're involved with that, believe me, they are too. I mean, the UN has even been involved in human trafficking, and that was way back in the 90s in the Balkans. That's an established fact that UN peacekeepers and various UN officials have been involved in all kinds of illegal activities. And they do it under the cover of the wonderful reputation among some people that the UN has. And in reality, of course, many people around the world absolutely despise the UN. The blue helmets. You ask somebody in Haiti about the UN, the blue helmets, and they're a bunch of thieving, raping, murdering criminals. And a lot of these other African countries that are supposedly being protected by the UN, and they do not have much to say about this. Because the UN is not all stand up and goody-goody two-shoes at all. And a lot of these people, many of them, they would really like to just be left alone. They don't like any of these governments lording it over them, grinding their faces into the dirt, putting their boot heels on their necks and pointing guns at them and threatening them if they don't give them all their money or their wife or their kids or whatever that they want. They're tired of it. They want to be left alone so they can just live their life in their little village, in their tribal group, and with their relatives on their land, growing their own food. This is an enormous amount of the population of the planet. Most people do not live the very isolated and insulated lifestyle that people in the West do. America, the Western developed industrialized countries, the so-called first world. That's a relatively small percentage. Most of people in the world, sad to say, or maybe it's not so bad really, if they could just be left alone, living in these tribal groups in their traditional ways. And these people have been, the pressure on these people by the multinational corporations, by various military groups, by radical jihadists, radical Muslims and different radical type groups that have been selected by the world's, again, intelligence gathering organizations, that's what they call themselves. They've been selected, certain marginalized groups, very radical, are selected for the purpose of being the proxy army for the global corporatist empire. And they are trained, they are equipped, they're educated, they're told how to kill people, how to torture people, how to attack people, how to use advanced weaponry. They're given the weapons, like ISIS. And they are saying, okay, now you got your opportunity. You could go out and you can kick some butt in your country and take over. We'll make you the top dogs. This is nothing new. This has been going on for quite a long time. We take an example like Lawrence of Arabia. This is in World War I. Lawrence of Arabia, very romanticized figure, was actually a British intelligence agent. He was a secret agent. He was sent into Arabia to find the tribes, the wild, half-civilized, nomadic tribes, and inspire them, train them, give them weapons, lead them. Again, and what did he promise them? He promised them that they would be able to control Arabia if they could simply if they would use their natural, fighting ability, which they had, of course, for thousands of years, being basically warriors. They would gather the tribe. He gathered them together. They came together under Lawrence, and he told them, "Look, I will make you have your own country. We'll kick these foreigners out, these Turks who were running the show and exploiting the country." And of course, the Turks were part of the Ottoman Empire. They were at war with the Allies, Britain, France, and the Western European powers during World War I. And so what he was doing is going in an end run around the back of this very powerful portion, the contingent who were fighting the West, and to see if he could destabilize them from behind. And yes, sure enough, they did get control of Arabia after they kicked out the Turks and the other foreigners. And then what did they do? They essentially became Saudi Arabia, what is now Saudi Arabia. This is the family of Saud. They were contacted, during World War I. They were elevated up to the peak of power, and they still have power. And now they are just as bad, or if not worse, than the people who are controlling the Arab states, the conglomerate of tribes back then in those days. They're just running the show now. They're killing, torturing, imprisoning, threatening their rivals, their opponents, whoever they might be. They're oppressing their own people. They're enriching themselves, their family, incredibly, fantastically wealthy. Of course, during T.H. Lawrence's time, I don't think oil was that big of an issue. That was discovered later, but this is nothing but enhance their power, make the Saudis even more wealthy. And so the Saudis are actually importing their power, their weapons, their money to support various causes, and not necessarily to the benefit of the U.S. and NATO and the Western powers. They have their own agenda. They want to do their own thing. They want to support those groups that they think will benefit them in the long run. And who knows what these people are thinking of involved in, and we know that we can't always rely on these so-called allies to help us. They're out for themselves. This is the game. This is the way it's played. And the poor guy, the Army Ranger with his wife and young kid, who joins up, and he actually has a conscience. He's not a sociopath, and he feels so bad, and he probably has PTSD after 8 deployments. He may have other physical ailments, because the military is one of the most polluting organizations on the planet. Yeah, they pollute their own people. They don't only pollute the enemy, they they have giant burn pits on their own bases in the U.S. military in which they're throwing everything, including the kitchen sink, trucks, computers, trash, you name it, and just burning it, plastic. And they could care less about the environment, but they all think, well, we're trying to protect America. We can't be concerned about actually protecting the environment. What the reality is, that's only one of the ways that they're poisoning their own people. They do it on bases in the United States. The people in like Lackland Air Force Base, these people who live there, these are like small cities where people are growing up. They have kids running around, going to school, whole families. They're sitting basically on a toxic waste dump that they have created themselves. And then so the people get sick, the military personnel really get sick, and then what does the VA do? They won't acknowledge it. They think you're just a weakling. If you complain about being sick, you're not really sick, it's all in your mind. They don't want to pay for that. They want that gravy, that money from the U.S. taxpayers to go to the new weapons systems, to the new plans to destabilize and overthrow the next country. They don't want to pay that on to fix some poor sick guy, some veteran. And this guy who killed himself, one of many thousands. The rate of suicide is just over the top. It's out of control. This guy, like his wife said, he was calling out for help. He needed help. He wanted, he probably didn't even know what he wanted. How do you get the memories of war crimes out of your mind? Of seeing your buddies be killed, and you have survivor guilt from that. They shouldn't have been there in the first place. Afghanistan was no threat to the United States. Iraq was no threat to the United States. These are merely ways to destabilize the country, to get access to those natural resources. And of course, opium being a natural resource, just like marijuana or anything else. Natural drugs, very, very valuable commodity on the open market, the black market. And so now what do we have? In Africa, we have teams of advisors and Blackwater running around, killing people, assassinating people, trying to use proxy or train proxy army groups, training groups to destabilize those countries. And they're hoping that after the small group, which has been raised up to the level of a powerful force that can overthrow an entire government, they're hoping that that government can be used as a puppet government to let those multinational corporations come in and take what they want and keep their foot in the door. They want to keep their foot in the door in every continent on the planet. South America, Africa, Asia, the Middle East, wherever there can be access, the West wants to get that access. And what is it all about? Is it about keeping the lifestyle of Americans really high? Well, yes and no. The lifestyle of the Americans, the standard of living of Americans has been dropping over the last decade or so. Started in the 60s, started kind of going down in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, getting worse gradually. For the majority, for a few Americans, a small group, the lifestyle is getting more luxurious. Luxury items are flying off the shelves, expensive cars, beautiful mansions, fantastic, expensive high-tech mansions, buying islands, buying property in some of the most expensive cities in the world, the high-rise Manhattan penthouse or beautiful apartment looking out over the majestic skyline of New York City, worth millions, one small apartment in a location like that. And the elite, they like that. Maybe they have several of these. They've got the house in the Hamptons, they've got the house in the Keys, the Caribbean somewhere, they've got the apartment in Manhattan. Their greed, their urge to act to draw more and more physical wealth toward themselves is just no end to it. No end to it. While the ordinary people, the ones who pay the taxes, because the elite don't pay the taxes, they have ways of avoiding that. Many of them pay no tax whatsoever. And they have their accountants, their lawyers, to make sure that they don't have to pay those taxes. And they're just naturally criminal. They wouldn't have got to the position of wealth and power that they had if they weren't willing to do whatever it takes and be a criminal in order to get there. Those people, they're a threat. They're a threat to the rest of us, and the ordinary people who don't have that kind of power and really don't want that kind of power have to recognize that and be wary. You have the end of the middle class, the destruction of the middle class in the United States. People in Europe don't really understand that. I've talked to a lot of people, several people in England. A lot of people don't really get it. The idea that the American middle class might actually be on the way out very much, or their ability to be in the middle class is decreased. People are falling from the middle class down into, I don't know, what do you call it, the unemployed class? They used to call it the working class. I'm not sure if you could even call it the working class anymore. But they're dropping out of what is considered to be the middle class, the typical middle class lifestyle in this country. Not by choice, but because they have to. It's just happening to them. And for the old school people, they go, well, is that a bad thing? Because they're still stuck in the idea that the middle class, the middle class. When I was growing up, the hip, cool thing was to make fun of the middle class. This is back in the 60s. To make fun of because they were squares, man. They weren't cool. They were against taking drugs. They were against, a very loose, promiscuous lifestyle. So they were just fuddy-duddies. They weren't fun. They were too uptight, straight-laced. So we were down, many people back in those days were down on the middle class. And I don't know who they thought was cool. I guess if you were anything that wasn't middle class was cool. Aristocrats were cool. Working people were cool. Dropouts, anti-establishment people, hippies, whatever you want to call them, they were the cool ones. They were going to be the future. And some people, of course, think that, well, actually they did become the future. You have, well, they happen to be very left-wing, socialist maybe. So you might say, well, Obama actually comes from that kind of world. Maybe Clinton came from that kind of world too. And the hipsters, anything goes. And so now some people are saying, well, maybe the middle class wasn't so bad after all. Now that it seems like we're losing the middle class, wish we could get them back. They were actually kind of stand-up guys. They were relatively honest. They paid their taxes. They didn't annoy their neighbors. They kept their houses fairly decent looking, kept paint on their houses, kept their yards mowed. Were believed in family and mom and apple pie and baseball, whatever. All those things, like, oh, here we are in 2014, and the whole world is changing. The middle class is sort of no longer the bulwark of civilization. This goes back a long way. People have recognized that it is the middle class that is the civilizing force. It's not the aristocrats. It's not the lower classes. The aristocrats and lower classes are in some ways very similar. Their morals, their sort of rebellious attitude, they're scofflaws at these two extremes, the upper extreme and the lower extreme. And the middle class, they're the steady ones. They keep everything kind of going that we think of as a society. And we'll see how that all comes out, but we have to consider, where are we going from here? What are we going to do about this? How is this going to affect us? How are the changes that are coming down going to affect us? Are we going to go under? Because one thing we can be sure of is that there will be change. Right now, the stock market, it's gone down a little bit, but it was well over 17,000. 17,000 is almost an unheard of figure. Only in the last week or so has it gotten up that high. It was up to 17,250 or something like that. Now, yesterday I think it went down below 17 again, 17,000. But some people are saying that the people who are running this giant casino that is the stock market want to run it up to 20 grand, 20,000, and then they will pull the rug out from under it. They will drop it. They will cause a correction, and the U.S. economy and the world economy will see a correction like they have never seen in their lifetimes, and maybe greater than the crash of 1929. I have friends who have money in the stock market, and I've told them, I think you should probably get your money out pretty soon, because this cannot go on forever. These stocks are overvalued. There was a news story about some company that actually had no real value at all. It had no product. It was nothing more than an office. And it didn't produce anything. It had no value, but it was valued at over $4 billion on the stock market. So this is the level of the bubble that we're in. We thought we had a major bubble with a housing crash in 2008. Here it is 2014, so that was 6 years. So it could happen tomorrow, could happen next week or next year, or maybe 2 or 3 or 5 years from now. But sooner or later, it's got to come back down to reality. We have to live in reality at some time. At some point, reality has to return, and so that the real value of the stocks will have to be expressed in actual numbers. But because of the wish fulfillment of the media, of the leadership, of the stock market itself, because the numbers are cooked that we're given every day, the employment numbers. Right now we have unemployment of just over 6%. That's not too bad. That seems like a good deal. So they want to that seems really good. They don't tell you that these people actually aren't showing up on the unemployment rolls because they've given up. They're not trying to get employment anymore. And they're not telling you that those people that are working at very low wage paying jobs. We have wage stagnation right now. That's one of the reasons why we're not getting as much inflation as we would. If wages were to go up at all, and they need to go up, then we would have inflation. That's called wage inflation. That makes the prices of everything start to go up once the wages go up, because it costs more to make a product when you have to pay your employee more. So you have to charge more across the board. And this is a source of inflation. What they're trying to do is have it both ways. They're printing all kinds of money without the real, actual numbers to back it up, to actually support the amount of money creation. And this has a naturally inflationary, it tends to inflate the money. When you print more of anything, you create more of anything, then the value of each individual unit becomes less. And they're only able to tamp that down because they're creating artificially low. They're keeping the price of gold and silver artificially low. Gold and silver has been a natural escape mechanism. When people lose faith in the dollar, then they turn to gold and silver. But they don't want the price of gold and silver to be high, because then people would think, wow, gold and silver is holding its value. It's rising in value, whereas the dollar is decreasing in value. As inflation happens, the amount that each individual dollar is worth becomes less and less. That's what inflation does. The opposite happens for gold and silver. When the fiat currency loses value, then gold and silver naturally goes up. But it's being artificially tamped down. And the way they do that is by selling these gold and silver certificates and using them on the stock market. And you're supposed to be able to turn in one of these certificates for physical gold or silver. The reality is, though, they're selling more of these certificates than there is gold in the world and silver in the world. So again, you have this, you have so much of this phony gold and silver floating around that it seems like there's more gold and silver than there actually is. And when you have more of something more and more and more and gets more common, then the individual value of each individual unit goes down. And so they have to do that to keep people from panicking and buying gold and silver. They want them to sell their gold and silver, and they say, well, this isn't really worth very much, so maybe I should just get rid of it. Whenever the price goes up, people start buying gold and silver. This is historically what happens. Some people sell when they're smart, and it goes up. But we have to understand that it's a very complex system, and they have learned how to run it, to keep it. And they have control over the military. They have control over the media. The government is a monolithic organization. You have the NSA that can track everything you do, what you say on the telephone, on the internet. And they're tracking what you buy, what you don't buy, what sites you're going to. All this information is being more and more processed through giant computers. We live in a science fiction world in which the information is collated, it's examined, it's boiled down, and predictions are made about the direction that human beings, Americans, are going, what they're thinking, what they're planning, what group movements, which direction group movements. They're definitely expecting there to be civil unrest in the future. And they're getting ready for that. They're arming up. They're bringing enormous amounts of heavy equipment, military-style equipment, trucks, troop carriers, big weapons, back from these wars in Afghanistan and around the world as they're trying to pull back from these. They're leaving forces in Afghanistan, in Iraq. They say the troops are pulling out, but actually they have the contractors there the U.S. Taxpayers are still paying for. And they're not troops, but they're mercenaries. They're private mercenaries, so they're not actually technically troops. They're not actually Army, Navy, Air Force. But they have to somehow keep this thing going as long as they can, and hopefully they think that they can, when it's right at its height, they will just step aside. They'll just jump ship. They'll just move. They'll just pull out. They'll sell all their stocks when it's really high, and then just watch the whole thing crash. All that has to happen is just for a few people to sell, to start selling. To, Warren Buffett or whatever. People who are on the inside who know what's coming. And very quickly, the whole thing will just collapse. It could happen virtually overnight. And that people's IRAs, even their bank accounts, because their banks would completely fail, instantly fail. The very next day, they're just gone. The money is gone. Money out of your bank account, vanished. Investments, stocks and bonds, vanished. Value of your home, depressed, down, way down again. Losing your job, losing your career, whatever, fired or laid off. You have what about? They say, what about my insurance? What about my insurance? Isn't my bank account is insured by the federal government? Not in a situation like this. Not necessarily, because when a major bank or any bank goes under, there are creditors that will be paid off first, and if anything is left over, because you, the depositor, are an unsecured creditor, if anything's left over after all the other creditors are paid off, then you will maybe get some money. The federal government insures your deposits, and they have a pool of money, but it's not nearly big enough to cover everybody, to give people the money that they would be needing to cover their deposits. So they just simply don't have it. I'm not trying to paint a gloom and doom picture. I think that for people who study this, who think about what money actually is and how it works, don't take my word for it. Look for yourself. Try to learn. There's plenty of information out there on all these subjects. You can find out, you can learn, you can educate yourself, and you will learn how to prosper in the situation. There are always winners and losers in even the most catastrophic situation. And you can learn what to do, how to get out of debt as much as possible, and minimize your lifestyle. Get ready, start living within your means. That's one of the first steps. Live healthier. If you don't have insurance, you've got to be healthy. So really, that's about it. I'm out of time. You have a great weekend and sleep well, friends.